Hello and welcome to Hospitality Talks. First of all, I wish everyone good health, warmth, strength and resilience, and together we will do more than getting through this. And I'm very proud and happy that we have a very special segment today which deals with design and also looking at the design from the sustainability point of view, since we are now entering into what some people call the novel economy. So here's my partner in crime, Abid Butt,
Thank you.
and he will then introduce the panel.
Thank you very much, Sam. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. For those of us who are joining us on our multicast, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn Live, it's great to have you back with us. As we all know, COVID-19 has changed the world. Design has always played a critical role in creating experiences, but after COVID-19 and in the discussions that are occurring as to how we learn to live with it, our esteemed panel is going to help us understand what has worked in the past, what might have to be changed. I heard this morning that a Disney park in Shanghai is opening. I wonder how they're going to be able to practice social distancing, and is it that Mickey is now going to be wearing a facial covering, and would that scare kids or would that attract kids? Similar principles apply in the hospitality industry. Hospitality industry has many characteristics. It can be intangible, it is inseparable, it's simultaneous, it's experiential, and design has been a critical factor over the decades in delivering what the consumer has wanted. Hoteliers have had to shift as a result of what the consumer needs are. Designers have built these places, designed and built these places to attend to that. And our panel is going to help us understand the past trends and talk about the future. So let's get started with that, if that's okay, Sam?
Yes, absolutely, Abid.
So let me bring Rebecca Jones first to start us out. Rebecca Jones is founder and CEO of RD Jones Interior Design and Architecture. Rebecca, welcome to Hospitality Talks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to join. I know everybody is hunkered down in this era of stay at home, but fortunately, there is a silver lining. A lot of the cities, a lot of the countries are starting to ease restrictions. So hopefully before too long, we'll be back to our social being and be able to interact with people in person as opposed to just doing it in virtual world. Hope your day has been good. I hope your morning is starting out well.
It has, and it's not raining here, and we're thrilled.
That's little things, they make a big difference.
Appreciate the little things, and we are in the office today. We've about 4 people, but it's a positive to have some people running around the office and communicating. It's pretty essential in the world that we live in.
Terrific. Rebecca, a minor technical thing. You might have to shift your camera a little bit so that viewers will be able to see, because I believe you're partly being cut off, but that's a minor thing. Let me ask you, you've done a lot of work for the longest time in hospitality world. Walk us through some of the trends over the last decade as to what is still applicable, what has changed over a period of time. Because as you know, lots of things have evolved with newer generations as they came into the travel industry. So please help us understand and walk us through some of the design trends.
Well, many of the trends start, as starting from the front door, the social element of the lobby, the connection of the bar and open seating, everybody connecting into different zones, from a high energy zone to low zones, but everybody having access to food and beverage. I think the technology has brought a huge component for everybody wanting to work and associate and come out of, come out of their guest rooms into the lobby space. Registration has broken out into pods, and the whole come out forward and greet. All these things that I'm mentioning are what are going to be our future challenges. Going up to the guest room, and I'm going to mention one minor little detail is the transport from the ground level to your guest room, going through an elevator, and how will be affected through this COVID. The guest room has become a lot more, shall I say, user-friendly. We have much less furniture with drawers, more accessible for furniture moving around to meet your needs, more resilient surfaces on the floor through all of this. And then the bathrooms, again, I think a huge focus has been on the bathrooms and a little bit more upscale detailing and design input. I mean, design, I think, is the thread that is carrying us all through from a select service up to luxury. Everything has a strong design element that we're working with.
Very true. The boutique hotel movement, when it began, it's completely on the design attributes that give the hotels that characteristics. Thank you for that, Rebecca. If you could tell us a little bit about your design philosophy when you deal with clients, how do you, what attributes are there that you try to put into your design work?
I mean, the creative piece is always what we strive to create: unique experiences, special experiences, but also spaces that are, I'm going to say the word comfortable, that are usually very functional. You're in the moment, but you're on the periphery, so you can see everything going on, so everybody can join in, but have a lot of more, I'm going to call it a little bit more nooks and crannies that they can actually get into their own world with friends, business associates, to be out in the view but separated. I think that's going to somewhat play well in this new design element. I mean, all the materials functionally, which is another piece that we stress, are, how is everything going to perform? How's it all going to hold up? I do think, is some of the past philosophies of surfaces, lighting, are all going to have a huge effect in this new world of COVID, of how those will be cleaned and sanitized. So the design philosophies are there now. How are they going to be treated? I think again, the level of detail is very important. That it is, there's always retail trends that affect the hotel world and vice versa. That every point is special. The service level is supposed to be incredible, and again, how is that going to be affected during this in the new world? But convenience, technology is all the drivers that I think that so much of the design is been built around, and they will be helpful tools going forward.
So, Rebecca, if we focus in on the guest room component in a hotel, a typical urban hotel guest room layout has probably remained the same. You walk in, the bathroom is either on your right or left, and then you walk into the sleeping area, if you would. I know at least a lot of the upper upscale hotels have been tearing out their bathtubs as they redo it to go into a shower scenario. That was huge. I know some of the hotels have gotten rid of the desks that were very typical in the guest rooms. Do you see any more changes coming about that consumer is driving even pre-COVID-19?
Yeah, just the entry sequence, just the lack of possible, closets have become more minimal, some very open, much more space to put your things, but not necessarily away, just places to locate your things. The closet has been a huge changing component in the design. Nobody takes their stuff and puts it in any drawers. So the drawers have gone away. The levels of lighting, I think, have been a huge impact because that's been one of the largest complaints going forward. Hard surfaces on the floors instead of carpet have been, trending, and putting area rugs so they are more cleanable. I think those are huge. The bathroom design, probably in all, has been the one piece that has really elevated itself to be open, be exposed. Actually, doing glass walls, having natural light come into the spaces from the exterior windows, and it's a lot more engaging. It's amazing how many ways you can design a bathroom when you eliminate the solid wall structures. So all of that is now a big connection. So the room is becoming open, but obviously with separation.
So that's a great thought, and I will turn it over to Sam in a second here, because bathrooms all of a sudden, particularly in luxury hotels, bathrooms got a massive focus. Actually, quite candidly, in a lot of the resorts, bathrooms was just as big as the living area was. Any new things coming about that also might be applicable in the world COVID-19? Because is it that we are looking at faucets that are sensor automation, or lights that would automatically come on, or toilets that, Toto, when they introduced their toilets, which was all automated? Is that more of that what we'll see in COVID-19 world?
I think you're going to see, I think the guest room is going to be a bit more challenging than all those elements you're talking about for the public area. I think are definitely going to be have a huge effect. When it comes to the guest room, just the sheer cost and budgeting, on luxury, yes, they could definitely be doing it. But I do think trying to make all of those things work, because automation is wonderful as long as it is working. The Toto toilet is a miracle element that every guest room should have it, but the affordability is just, it does not meet the budget. I think what is going to be interesting is with lighting and how being able to engage ultraviolet lights into the design to help kill those surfaces. I mean, the chemicals that are going to be used to clean the surfaces, I think there's just going to be far more stringent details to do it, and trying to do less touch points. I mean, a guest bathroom is still a guest bathroom that's well used, and I think the cleanliness of it is going to kind of be the major factor. But on public area bathrooms, I think all those points of automatic faucets, automatic doors, self-flushing toilets, door openers are all going to be the less touch points are going to be an absolute critical component to going forward.
Terrific, thank you, Sam.
Well, Rebecca, a lot of great thoughts, and also things that you are really in touch with what people are thinking about. I think that's what I'm sensing from what you're saying. You're doing luxury, obviously, in your design for luxury hotels. Mm-hmm. question is that can luxury be sustainable, and how is there a way that the design is changing because of now what some people call the novel economy, or how things are perceived very differently than a few months ago?
I think that we've always found the trend that luxury will take a hit, but often it will return quickly, just because people with money typically have the money to expend, and I think I don't really think let's say dial forward 6 months, and we are open and functioning, that I think luxury I personally think it'll be strong. I think the concern is more, I hate to say, is how are you traveling to get there, and so many touch points from Uber to airplane to, getting through the front door. And I mentioned the elevator coming through. I think that's going to be more fear points of exposure for whether any level of hotel. Yeah. How do you assure what's going to happen? Are hotel rooms going to be in suites? They can be cleaned very well, but will one person occupy it one night and it will not be rented the following night? There's a lot for consideration, but I do think overall the more cleanable surfaces and gaining guests' confidence that these things have been properly cleaned, and hoteliers are doing everything they possibly can to assure guests' confidence in their approach is going to be critical.
Is there any change you feel there in the choice of materials because of how people are perceiving that, how the hygiene and sanitation will be is very important to them?
There are lots of new products that are hitting the market that will allow this from the healthcare industry. Those are now, which wasn't important before, are becoming important, and those will, can happen going forward. The current challenge is we have all these hotels that are built with all these surfaces, and financially taking a hit. How are they going to do anything on replacements in a short-term turnaround? I think that's where the biggest concerns, will be coming. What do you do for the immediate? You can't address it in the long term. Yeah. But the products, unfortunately, are not as luxurious as what everyone's accustomed to delivering. They're much more, come from the medical world.
Yeah,
I'm sure they will improve.
Yes. Well, thank you, Rebecca, for those. Back to you, Abid.
Well, Rebecca, do you see any new technologies that are currently available? And you're spot on when you said that. How do we equip our facilities to take all this into account? Because at the end of the day, it requires funding, and hotels have been shut down for a few months. The business is not going to be roaring back immediately. So how do we make that work? Are there things that you have thought of or you worked with that can be easily implemented in our current facilities at minimal cost?
A little bit challenge, question to answer and saying how to implement those. I mean, I think technology will be the piece that will allow guest check-in that maybe they're not using it now, but have the ability to do that. That will get them through the process. Actually, having, getting the touch points through the elevator and opening the door to your room. On the inside of the room, I think maybe some covered. There's possibility of having surfaces that are covered that you're able to remove yourself. To be able to do that, I think the linens and cleaning for that, and again, this all goes to a service. So much of what we're talking about is a service world, because we're not going to be able to implement huge change with budget, so it's all going to come from service. Cleanliness and just let's say upholstered furniture. I think that's going to be a big concern as well. You can clean surfaces, but what are you dealing with upholstered furniture? Are we going to have to do some slip covering and things like that? Are throw pillows going to be removed totally from the room? How do you turn on lights? So that we're going to have some switches with covers over them. I think those are I'm really focusing on how the immediate, how to react, because there's thousands and thousands of hotel rooms out there. How are we going to respond to that? And I think it's the technology of covered pieces that it's your use. You peel it away and throw it away, so no one's been there prior.
Well, that's a great point. That's where the bedspreads went out and duvets came in, because customers felt like that they wanted to make sure that those duvet covers had been washed. So that's why all whites came about. When you talk about slip covers for couches and chairs, it reminds me of the plastic covers that used to be in place some time ago, but it might be retro. It might be coming back. But do you think that the old heat lamps in the bathroom are being replaced by UV light lamps that somehow sanitize and kill the germs? Does that technology even exist at this point?
The UV is coming out, and yes, it does exist. Part of the challenge is, yes, your bathroom typically does have recessed tie hats that this could open and penetrate. Your typical shower lights have covers over them, so can it penetrate through a cover, because it's required by code for shatterproof. The luxury side has recessed tie hats that they can do. It's quite possible that there will be portable lamps brought in as portables that you can turn on and leave on that will help cure this. I have not seen all the stats to say what level does this at what percentage is it actually helping to delete germs. So a lot of this there's lots of talk, but I'm still waiting to see all the scientific evidence that this is worth going and investing in. So at the end of the day, I do think we're just precautions, coverings, and cleanliness for a guest room is going to be, that's how we're really going to have to handle this going forward.
I thank you for that insight. I see that in addition to the shampoo, conditioner, and that sort of stuff, all of a sudden we would be handing out the disinfectants, and Clorox wipes will become a guest room amenity, or when people arrive, instead of like we used to do in Hawaii, giving you a lei, we might be giving you a mask at this immediate future. But hopefully it's a short-term thing, and before too long, things will be back. So, Rebecca, thank you for your insight. Please stick around, because we will have question and answer in a second. Let me bring our next speaker on, Sarah Fox. She's Senior Associate Vice President with Callison RTKL. Sarah, welcome to Hospitality Talks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, thank you for joining us, Sarah. I know your organization is involved in design works for several different verticals, whether it's hospitality, whether it is hospitals, airports, convention centers. So you within your organization, you've got a lot of different disciplines from design perspective. But if I may start you out the same way, sort of walk us through some of the design trends that you have seen over the last decade, please.
Well, just to carry the conversation, I think a lot of the same points. In the sense of just drawing in the idea of the community and the idea of the hotel becoming more of a gathering space for not just the hotel guests, but the visitors outside. So whether it's from your bar lobby, your F&B zones, it's not just there for the guests coming down for breakfast. It's the hot spot, in the downtown centers, in the urban areas, and so on and so forth. And then in terms of public spaces and how we're seeing trends move towards that, I think going back to this idea of wellness, this is not a new concept. With LEED, we've been working towards getting our hotels up to LEED standards. It's slower than most different types of building types, just because of the amount of usage and the amount of energy that it takes for us to build hotels and to operate hotels to Rebecca's point, to a luxury standard, in terms of our water pressures and energy loads during unoccupied times. And we're getting better with that. And I think that right now we're definitely going to see a push to make LEED and then now the wellness credential as well become much more in the forefront of how we're designing hotels. And I think a very important quality to both of those is daylighting. And so we're definitely seeing a lot more use of natural light in our lobby spaces, clearly, but also moving into our ballrooms and our meeting spaces. Before, we'd have the windowless box for four walls, pretty standard typology of a meeting space. Now we have brands that really want to introduce that natural light. And then beyond just windows, literally like opening up that meeting space to outside terraces as well. And so redefining like what the meeting space is. It's no longer just sitting on a chair watching a big screen and listening somebody drone on and on and on about a topic. Now the push is to get them outside, get some fresh air, take the meetings out to the fitness lounge, get some calisthenics in. And so that's been a very interesting push to see brands really push that. Sometimes it doesn't work in terms of how event planners necessarily want to run things, but I definitely see that that's the trend moving forward, and even more so now.
Superb. Hey, Sarah, any particular elements in your design philosophy as you look at the spaces and you trying to create these experiences? Anything in particular that you think about and take into account?
Well, I always feel that the most successful design really comes from understanding the business of the product you're designing. So whether it's hotels or multifamily or healthcare, you really have to be client-centric, client-focused. You have to listen. You have to understand what it is their needs are, and then you design to that. And then you take that and you couple it with a balance of aesthetics and authenticity, and that is what truly makes for a successful design. And so that's how I approach my design process. It all comes from co-collaboration and co-creation with our clients, and not just your clients, but the community too, and the end users. And so as much as possible, tying it in, work sessions, shredding, data collection, all of that kind of upfront work before pen even gets to paper. And so with that, that sort of essentially establishing that list of kind of ground rules. This is the path moving forward, and we always go back to that and making sure that we always are respecting those goals and that those goals are carried all the way through.
Terrific. Now, focusing in on public areas in hotels, if you would, and particularly whether it's lobby or ballrooms and meeting rooms, hotels have all been about bringing people together. COVID-19 has changed our world. We're all stuck, separated apart. How do you think these spaces will be utilized moving forward? What design elements will have to be adapted to make this COVID-19 world so that we can operate in this world?
Yeah. Obviously, this is a question that's on everyone's minds, and it's a challenging question because it's hard to see, what it's going to be past this very immediate concern. And the goal is, or not the goal, but the hope is that we won't have to completely rethink the meeting space, because I think at the end of the day, you have the basic functions. You need a place to meet, to gather, to learn, to network, and then also to break. And all of those factors go into what meeting spaces were pre-COVID-19 and what they will still remain as post-COVID-19. But so what does that mean sort of, I guess, in the immediate future? I think obviously just like Shanghai Disney, they're limiting their capacity to 30%. I think we're going to see the same thing with our meeting spaces and our public spaces, that you are, the amount of attendance is going to diminish in the next, for the next 2 years. And that's just a matter of fact. So whereas companies might be able to send 50 employees to a particular conference, now they're going to do 10%, and the rest will have to do web conferencing in. So back to the idea or the notion of technology, that's the word that we're going to hear over and over and over again in this conversation, is how do we use technology to be able to monitor that and to screen for that overcapacity. Along with that, I think, starting from the very point of arrival, there's going to be this idea of incorporating technology to almost give a very hopefully subtle and non-invasive way of being able to do an actual health screen check on guests and visitors coming into any public space. And if for some reason they don't pass a particular screening, I think you're going to start to see how that arrival experience can be ushered into more, areas that can be segregated, and not, big public lobby spaces or check-in spaces. Obviously, I think the remote check-in is also going to come into play, and that comes for not just checking into a hotel, but checking into your meeting spaces as well. So as much touchless and contactless procedures will probably be the norm, and I, realize that is not the service industry that we're in, where we want to have that human interaction. I just think the human interaction will come in a way that doesn't necessarily involve, human to human contact.
Well, that's a very good point. I'll turn it over to Sam here in a second. So are we looking at thermal scanners that all of us in our black ties are walking through before we can attend our functions? Are we looking to have service elements that might be done differently to bring food to the table, whereas these large functions typically had 8 or 10 people sitting around the table? Now it might only be 4 people sitting around the table.
Exactly. Yeah, your 8 tops are going to turn to 6 tops. The chairs that are interlocking together in big ballroom spaces are not going to, either they will interlock and there's just something placed between the 2 chairs indicating that you cannot sit there or sit in close proximity. Just like the airlines, you're not going to be able to buy the middle seat anymore, so things like that for sure. And then in terms of, the food service, we all know that the buffet lines are going to be gone, and most likely, back to prepackaged box lunches with seals, so that you have a great kind of sense of trust that has not been touched, or the handle, ladling your salad onto your plate has not been touched by so many other people before you. What I think is actually a really interesting point that we do need to make with all of this public front of house is, the idea of what's going on with our back of house, because as we know, every hotel cannot operate and function and provide the services, whether it's from your lobby spaces to your guest rooms or to your meeting spaces, but without, really, depending on your back of house. And so I see in the, where we might not be using kitchens to be creating these big buffet lines for meeting spaces, I think this is the time to act, the immediate time for developers and owners of hotels to act right now and re-strategize, rethink the way your kitchens are laid out, and invest in your properties. Now is the time to upgrade your systems, upgrade your mechanical, so that, back to the word that's going to be used over and over again, the cleanliness aspect of how you manage and operate your hotel in any space is done in a way that is up to the latest standards.
So I see a position of a hygiene specialist being created in all the hotels, and I see on our buyout list vacuum packed machines coming up so that we can have these bento boxes vacuum packed and delivered to the table. Yeah. Sam, over to you.
Yeah. Well, more like a comment. I think also, like the airlines, you have this airflow of how much air is going into the spaces and how much oxygen is pushed in. I think a lot of that very expensive systems will have to be addressed, because I think the customer will at the end demand, well, how pure is the air is what I'm breathing when I'm sitting around maybe 100 people. But also, I'm just wondering whether the buffets is a little bit thing of the past. I mean, it's a thing that, particularly in Asia, buffets are very popular, and also in Middle East, buffets are very, very popular. But do you have any comment from your point of view, the kind of design and layout of spaces? Whether are you looking at those things these days, or are we going to see what is the post COVID era? Whether this is do we go back to the way we are used to enjoying our function meals and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be self-serve. If it's going to go back to buffet, it'll definitely be service-led, and that, you will not be able to, grab your own foods from the particular buffet line. And clearly, probably longer queue spaces as well. So, designing for the ability where you place them and making sure you have that queue space available.
Yeah.
And then, it's just hard to predict more than 3 years in the future these days, what will happen. So hopefully, in 2 years, a vaccine will be found, and it's that public level of trust where we might be able to see going back to more of these service levels that we had before.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for those comments. Back to you, Abid.
A lot of the coffee breaks in pre-function areas for these large conventions, we had gone to pre-portioned stuff that people just walk by and pick it up. But of course, that might have to be rethought through. For that matter, the large convention nomenclature might have to be changed altogether, at least in the short term. And how does that work? These large hotels that were able to have a banquet function of 500 to 1,000 people, that the capacity would be halved. Now, we were talking about Disney in Shanghai. They have this QR code that is almost a seal of approval for you to go in the park. I don't think US will get to that point, and they have these contact tracing elements that are being looked at. I don't think US will get there, but technology will play a role in gaining consumer confidence to make sure that the surfaces are clean, so that people can indeed focus on why they're in the facility, as opposed to being paranoid and walking around with the disinfectant wipes or dispensers. Any further thoughts on that at all?
Again, I think it's going to come in the implementation of technology. I know this is not, it's a very costly endeavor, but the idea of having monitors and sensors that can track, air infiltration, it can track, when, heat loads are rising, and whether it's just due to population control inside of particular spaces. But I think it's the idea of having that, and then having it being on a monitor that is accessible to all of the guests. And it's not something that's in your face like a mask or gloves that we're wearing, but it's a trackable device that people can probably, obviously, like just when you go to a conference, you have an app that's giving you all of your, schedule of events. The same thing is going to happen. You're going to have app-based programs on your watch, your phone. That's just going to be part of the daily meeting. I think future going forward in the future is just being able to track it from a health welfare standpoint as well.
A lot of learnings, and we all learn and adapt as we go along. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for those insights. Please stick around. We will get right back to you with some question answers towards the tail end. Let me bring our next speaker, Haley Balzano, who's the Chief Executive Officer of BNP. Haley, welcome to Hospitality Talks.
Her mic's on.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, great to have you. Again, we talked about we learning how to do business in this world. So technology is part of that. We might not have thought of doing these kind of conversations with live streaming a year ago, but these things are very apropos in how we are operating today. So thanks for being here. Sarah was talking about big crowds, public areas. Now you have designed hundreds of restaurants with fabulous ambiance that people pack them in. And that's what created that ambiance, and that's what created the restaurant. So again, the same question, walk us through some of the design trends that have been applicable, that have evolved over the last decade or so in restaurant world, please.
Well, the restaurant world has transformed significantly over the past decade. I think that we have experienced what I would call a restaurant boom that has happened. People who used to go out for dinner for special occasions, it's now becoming a part of your everyday life. In 2019, there was a report that came out that said that 45% of adults wish that they ate out more often, and that the average American adult ate out 5.3 times a week. So that was significant compared to what we're seeing right now, given the current situation. This year, 2020, was expected to see a 4% growth over the restaurant industry, which is much higher than a lot of other industries that we have around this country. Obviously, we're not going to see that happen. But as a part of that whole thing about restaurants having the boom, it was all about people coming together, being part of a community, sharing a meal, sharing an experience. It also has to do with a lifestyle association. You want to go and have a meal with people that you associate with in an environment that makes you feel better about yourself. That's where you started to see this evolution of having a truly fully branded restaurant experience. We've also seen a big evolution of niche markets, people specializing in specific types of cuisine or certain types of experiences. In the fast casual world, you've seen a big push for specialty pizza places, hot chicken as of recently. In full service, I think that you start to see things that are really celebrating more experiential, the experiential side of things, and really being about a sense of local and about a sense of
Okay, we might have lost you there for a second, but thank you for that. And again, the same thing, as you're designing these restaurants, as you're creating these spaces, any particular philosophy that you use in creation of these concepts?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's made us incredibly successful. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yep,
Yes,
you're back.
Okay. One of the things I think that's made us incredibly successful is having kind of a different approach to the restaurant industry. We really look at it as a fully branded experience. And that involves every little element, from the sense of arrival, the design, the lighting, the uniforms, the menus, even down to the music. Everything is fully curated to create a one-of-a-kind experience. It's creating these things that allow operators to kind of have a market differentiator in comparison to all the other things that are out there as a part of this boom. So we really try to utilize market differentiation and also efficient operations to make a space really feel fully branded and whole. What we do from a creative standpoint is also just truly getting into the heart of operations and figuring out what is going to work efficiently, because you can still walk into a beautiful space, but if operationally it doesn't work, if we're not being efficient in how many steps it takes a bartender to make a cocktail and then get it out to the guests, then we haven't done our job either.
You're absolutely correct, particularly in restaurant world. Every step counts, every minute counts, because consumer expectations have gone up. These experiences that are being created, the speed of service is very, very, very important. So very good points there. In terms of key elements in design, talk a little bit about the sense of place and experiences and what the quote-unquote lifestyle component is.
Well, I know how much you love the word lifestyle. Oh, okay. So I think lifestyle is a word that's incredibly overused, as is the word brand, but we're using both of those here today because they seem to encapsulate certain elements that no other words can, and they're pretty universal. But when it comes to hospitality, and specifically hotels and restaurants, I think we use the term lifestyle divine to define the sector of what's creating the ultimate guest experience. Typically, this means that we're designing an experience to concentrate on a specific consumer or locale or specific menu item. It's how we use the built environment to cater to that sector through use of like materials, lighting, music, technology, and anything we can to kind of create that overall vibe. When that comes to trends that we're seeing in restaurants right now, I think one thing really especially over the past decade has been hyper focus on sourcing of ingredients, but also creating a space that is associated with the local market. And then we've seen tons of design trends opting more towards an open kitchen, having that experience of the theater, and also that sense of honesty and freshness that's come through with the food. Having a central bar because it's such a unique, high energy, convivial space. That's something that has always been an anchor in our designs. And then some of the other things that we've seen lately are community tables, which I think is going to be a thing of the past for the time being. And also kind of a reinvention of nostalgia. You know, people are picking up on some older concepts and bringing them back into new life. You're seeing that through crafted cocktails, through food presentation, through tableside presentation, which was something that went away and was only a full service thing before. Now you're seeing certain elements of it come back as a part of that theatrical experience at your table.
So are we looking to have the white gloves back on because it's a necessity, but it was used some time ago? Are we looking at cloches coming back into the restaurants? Is nostalgia going to be in place in the restaurants, at least in the immediate future?
I think for a certain component, yes, because I think nostalgia is going to be one thing that gives everybody a sense of connection and harmony to a time pre-COVID. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of comes back. But yes, I do think that we are going to see some changes in uniforms for sure. And how can we creatively do that without it feeling like you're in a hospital ward and still give a sense of comfort and welcoming?
Fabulous. Over to you, Sam.
Well, I mean, the restaurant scene is really going to be affected a great deal. And I think, first of all, I love your designs. These are really, really compelling and really, really beautiful. I mean, in terms of the food service and so on, I think the customer will always want to feel that this is specifically done for me, and it's that there is nothing between the kitchen and me getting the plate on the table that will have affected, that will not be fully not sanitized. That's absolutely the wrong word for this, but that is absolutely looked after and so on. So I can see that the customers will be more than ever will be paying attention to the things that we didn't really pay attention in the same way about how things are personalized, that meal or whatever it is will be as safe as secure by the time it gets in front of me.
Absolutely. I think we're going to see so many changes. And then comes the question, kind of back to Abid's point in the beginning, of sustainability versus safety. Yes. Because some of the things that we're going to have to do in the near future from a food service standpoint are going to be primarily for the sense of safety, but it's going to create so much waste in an industry that is already incredibly wasteful and waste conscious. But we're going to see so many different things happen, and we don't have all the answers yet, but some of the things that we're looking about doing is kind of taking what really was a social experience and turning it upside down. This whole idea of coming together is now almost a thing of caution. So how can we do things creatively to still create that fun environment, but do it in a safe way? So food presentation and delivery methods are going to be, I think, at the forefront of that. I think that having prepackaged things that are being delivered to the table versus having a server walk open air and pass by a million people is going to be something that's going to be looked at. Materiality is going to be a big thing. Soft seating, we're going to see disappear for a little while, have everything be cleanable, wipeable, and being able to sanitize between service. Menus, I think we're going to have to go to a contactless menu, whether that's a piece of paper that's disposable or if it's a QR code that sits on your table that allows you to scan it and look at the menu on your phone. Having cutlery and linens and all of those things on tables, you're going to see that disappear. Salt and pepper shakers are going to have to be something upon request or have prepackaged things that are a part of your food. These are all little things that are not only going to affect us creatively from a design standpoint, but I have major concerns just for restaurateurs from an operational standpoint. All of these things have a direct implication of cost to them, and they're already suffering so much. This whole thing of social distancing for them is going to be a major impactor on whether or not restaurants survive. If we're only able to fill a restaurant to 30, 40, 50% capacity, but they're still having to pay the rents that they would on a thing that's full capacity, and how are they going to handle their staffing? These are all major, major considerations, and I think that we're going to see this industry get crushed for the next foreseeable future. So it's very, very challenging times. My hearts go out to everybody that's in this industry because it's a sad, sad situation right now.
Now in Helsinki, for instance, just to give you what has happened, of course, none of the restaurants are operating except to have takeaway, and majority of restaurants didn't have a takeaway philosophy at all, and they have to really quickly come up with the idea of they were not used to making any home-cooked, so to speak, home-cooked meals in the past in the menus, and now this is what they're doing because people want to have just sort of the comfort food that they normally would get at home and so on. So that's the big thing. And there was a restaurant concept that was open just maybe 6 months ago. It's called Zero. So it's called Zero Waste Restaurant, and I'm going to look at them how they are doing things differently now once they are able to open up, hopefully in June. But the idea is that they are utilizing everything in their raw ingredients, so they are committed not to absolutely have no waste. And actually, the portion sizes are quite small, in fact, compared to what you might be used to in some of the other countries. So just an observation from my side.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that happen a lot, even on the full service sector. You're going to have to find new creative ways to get the food out to the consumer without and make up for the difference because you're not able to fill your restaurants. I was actually just reading an article last night about how food influencing is even going to change. So a lot of chefs are using different tools like social media to get better exposure for their brands. But now, instead of being able to do full service, what they're doing is they're putting together recipes and prepackaged things of ingredients and using all of their food sourcing to then have these take-home kits where people can even go and cook them at home. You've seen this new resurgence of people getting more passionate about cooking at home because they've had to. So I think that there's some other tools and methods, whether or not you're able to buy packages of vegetables from local sources and utilizing the restaurants as an opportunity to kind of cooperatively buy those things and bring them home. These are all going to be different elements that are a part of design in how we now start to lay out restaurants and allow for people to come experience that on completely different levels.
Yeah. It's interesting.
So, we talked about tabletops as to how that might involve. When I think about that, having cutlery packaged and sterilized, that reminds me of a dental office more than a restaurant. Is that appealing for us to go in a beautifully designed restaurant where I'm trying to socialize, but the cutlery comes in these packages, yet it has to be done? Sam talked about the pre-prepared meals. Now, certainly during this pandemic, takeaway and food delivery has been a huge component because the in-restaurant dining is non-existent. How has the design evolved taking that into account? Because I think that would only grow. The likes of Uber Eats or Food Panda or whatever these services are, that will continue to grow, where people, at least in the immediate future, might still opt to have the food delivered as opposed to going to eat in the restaurant.
Yeah, I think you're going to start to see designs change where there might be a secondary lobby space or a separate entrance or something that gives people a different sense of security for takeout and delivery services. It's going to be interesting to see how that truly affects design long term. I read another article recently about how operators as a whole are getting challenged with the whole takeout and delivery from Uber Eats and Grubhub and DoorDash and places like that because of the percentage of charge that they're putting on the delivery service. That can be upwards of 30% of the cost of the meal. And so I think we're going to have to figure out a way where there might be some cooperative things happening in neighborhoods where they're coming up with their own delivery service within that niche of restaurants. And how we can utilize that from a design standpoint is going to be interesting as well.
Well, up until now, the food delivery component, whoever the service is, whichever service the consumer uses, quite candidly, it's been disjointed because it's a relatively new concept. So most of the time you see these pickups, folks coming through the restaurant to get to the kitchen and pick it up and walk out, or try to figure out a way to make that happen. But I believe in the immediate future, that is going to be a big component, but before everything comes back to somewhat normal space, whatever that happens to be. Talk a little bit about bars, Haley. Bars are all about socializing. It's craft cocktails was a huge thing that required a lot of theatrics. How will that be in post-COVID world?
You know, it's going to be interesting because everybody loves their specialty cocktails right now. That's been a thing for quite a few years now, and theatrics are a big component of it. And it's also part of the design. We've done so many things creatively to create interesting back bars or even elements of the front bar component to celebrate fresh herbs, fresh fruit, all the different components that go into these crafted cocktails. Those are going to have to go by the wayside for the time being because it's out in the open. People can touch it, breathe on it, and do whatever. So I think you might see a shift in how people are ordering. It may be that there are pre-mixed cocktails that are coming out of keg dispensers or something like that, where it's already in a confined thing. You might see people ordering more beer and more wine because it's already been something that is prepackaged and there's less contact. So it's going to be interesting to see how it happens. And I also wanted to mention, going back to the food component of it, I think that we might see even more of a resurgence of things like food halls, because you are able to actually have a bunch of restaurateurs come together in a smaller footprint. There might be an ability to source ingredients and things in a more efficient place. And if we're doing more takeout and more delivery, then you've got it all kind of coming from one unified location. So it'll be interesting to see.
Any layout changes that you see in the immediate future? Obviously, restaurants have relied on volume, not only from fiscal responsibility point of view. The more people that are in the restaurant, the better it feels. It attracts more business. Certainly now with social distancing, that might not be a possibility. But do you see any functional layout changes that might come about? Do you see restrooms being placed at the entrance so that as you walk in, people would go through the restroom as opposed to going through a bar?
Mm-hmm. I think that that's a good point, and I think that might be something that we do see. It's hard to tell. I'm one of those people where I truly believe that the restroom in a restaurant is a direct correlation to the kitchen and the rest of the operations. And so we always try to do things that have an element of surprise and are just beautiful and interesting as a part of that. So it'll be interesting to see how we can incorporate that into the arrival experience. So you do have that hand washing and things that happen. Obviously, table placement and spacing is going to be a big thing. But nobody's going to want to go and sit in a big cafeteria style room with people, 10 feet away. So how can we do things with some cleanable, wipeable, decorative screening or some other elements of architectural interest to create a sense of privacy and intimacy while still creating that sense of comfort with the social distancing? How can we look at modifying table presentations to give that same sense of ambiance, but a sense of security too? I think bars may tend to be a little bit smaller, or they could wind up getting bigger because of the social distancing. It's going to be really interesting to see how people react to it.
Terrific. Let's, if it's okay, Sam, maybe we can go through some of the question answers and bring everybody back together. But while Sam tries to do that, just a question, and I might start out with Rebecca. Rebecca, on sustainable design, I know this has been talked about for a little while, on materials and recycled materials. How does that sustainability element fits into sanitized areas, and how do we put the two in place in designing spaces?
The materials being used for this are, anything that has the touch points, such as recycled materials being reused, whether it's fiber, which is going to be again challenging, recycled hard surface materials, again anything that's cleanable through chemical treatment, I think will sustain and carry forward. Anything that has been recyclable in a fabric component, I think is going to totally be rethought through this. And can it be used? I do know on the FF&E side that it has been more limited, that for using recyclable points. So it's going to be a challenge.
No doubt, no doubt. And I'll ask each of you about the budgets, because at the end of the day, we can accomplish anything given the dollars and cents. And typically that has always been an issue at the best of times. There's never enough money to do all the things that we want to do. So I will come back to you, but let me for now turn it over to Sam.
Well, I was looking at the comments here. I think people are just taken away by all the complete information that you have, and so I don't see any particular questions coming out of this discussion either on YouTube or here on LinkedIn. So just people are at all what you have provided.
Oh, fantastic. So let me go to Sarah. Sarah, dollars. Designers are always blamed for not sticking to the budget. There is never enough money, and developers are always trying to curtail expenses. Now we're going to need to find the money, at least in the immediate terms, as we start to open up. We're going to need to find some money. How do we budget for these things?
Well, I think this is a conversation I have all the time with my budgets.
Surprise, surprise.
Currently in a big one right now. But, my philosophy with budget is, you pick the items that you're going to get the most bang for your buck, right? And then the rest of them go to the sidelines. So you have to prioritize your budget. And right now the priority is on the health, safety, and welfare of our users. And that has got to push everything back to the back burner and push that to the forefront. So, what those priorities are, that's up to individual owners and developers to decide what are, how they want to hierarchy that. But I would say that is just, I almost feel that it's going to become just law. It's going to become code. Like we're going to see in the next year, the lawmakers, policymakers just create the well standards and make that part of the policies and procedures moving forward. So I don't think people are going to have a choice but to have to put that into their budget.
Fair enough. And Haley, over to you. You had talked about that it's going to be tough for the industry to begin with, reduce revenues coming in. Even the operating efficiencies are going to be out the door because we might only be able to operate at 30, 40, 50% of the total capacity. How do we find money, and what are those must-dos in immediate terms so that we can open for business? Any thoughts?
Well, I think the biggest thing is going to be for a lot of people to look at their business models and actually look at their locations as a whole. I think you're going to see a lot of people walk away from their current locations and go to smaller footprints because the current larger footprints are not going to be operational for the time being. So square footage is going to be a big thing that was going to help with the budget. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, unfortunately, there is some feedback, and I'm not sure where it's coming from. But if anybody has their speaker on, that would be great to either turn it off, or put yourself on mute. Sorry, you were saying, Haley.
So I think square footages and sizes are going to be one of the things that's going to help with budgetary things. The other thing that's going to help in the restaurant world is you'll order less furniture, right? You're going to have less chairs, less tables. So that's going to help. We're going to go with a lot of cleanable, wipeable surfaces. Typically, when you're going with soft seating, more upholstered seating, those tend to be higher budget items. So I think that that's going to help assist with budgets. And then I think technology and automation are going to be big components of as well. Automatic faucets, automatic toilets, automatic door openers, they're foot openers for doors, different elements like that. Those are things that we're going to have to see. But budget is going to be a big concern, and I think we're going to see a big loss across the industry with people just not being able to operate.
Haley, do you see future restaurants going to a smaller capacity? I mean, I know several very high-end restaurants, whether it is in Sydney or Copenhagen, but their seating capacity was only 25 to 30 people. Do you see that would take hold, even though unless you can charge an average check of a couple of $100 per person, it's hard to make money in those small places? But any thoughts on that?
I think we are, especially as we see takeout and delivery continue on. And you brought up a good point on the high end of fine dining. We've already seen that trend start to happen. All of those Michelin star restaurants are now even going to a ticketed system where you pre-purchase your seat, and so there's always a consistent number of guests. They've got their food costing down to a science, and they're able to do labor. I think you're going to see that transition into the rest of the full service sector and maybe even some of the fast casual sector.
Terrific. Rebecca, are we going to have to retrofit these? We were infusing smells in the lobbies and in the restrooms or elevators. Are we having to retrofit those dispensers with disinfectants now, and the smells go away? Again, do you think that any of those technologies currently exist, and how do we communicate that to the guests so that they feel comfortable using our facilities? Rebecca, you must be on mute.
Yes, thank you. It helps to get up. The smells, I think, are you going to change them? I think the real reality of what we're doing, the smells create comfort, but I think the true test is going to be the cleanliness, and maybe it's a visible cleanliness, that they are seen as trying to change stuff. Or what do they physically see in the services being provided to take care that they know it's being cleaned versus just hoping it's being cleaned? I think that's going to be relatively relevant. I do think we are in our process designing some attractive mobile separation pieces that would be able, in restaurants, be able to move and separate groups that are together. And in seating groupings, we've been challenged with some clients to say, take spaces and shrink them and have less seating to keep the separation together. So, I know you affected the technology piece, but I think it's somewhat going to be more of the physical pieces that we are really going to be dealing with through this design process, how to reinvent and change everything we've been doing. But it can also change back. I think that's the positive.
Very true. And I'm going to come back to all three of you. I have one last question for Sarah, but if you could think about some of the feel-good things that you have heard in the industry that is being done. I know there are lots and lots of restaurants that are cooking food and providing it for the healthcare workers. I typically like to end our session on those stories, and I know we are approaching the end of it. But Sarah, one last question for you. Your practice of healthcare design, I don't know if you have started having conversations. Are there best practices from those designs that could be implemented into lodging and hospitality without giving up the aesthetics and warm feeling of the hotels and restaurants?
Well, I think it's interesting that, the healthcare industry itself looked to hospitality industry for the last decade to see how they could make their patient customer experience be more in line with how hotel spaces are designed. And so now we're going to see this sort of look to the healthcare industry to see how they can inform how we design. So again, I think it's going to really be a look at how their product specifications and requirements, on their materiality, and then their HVA systems, and also how can we isolate guest rooms in the sense of the mechanical systems, and so on and so forth. So what we are seeing actually, is the idea of making the hotels more resilient in its uses. So it's not just to think of a hotel to be always as a hotel, but in times of crises like this, how could it be adapted into a healthcare facility? So obviously, clearly, like the unit itself is very similar to the healthcare unit. So you've got your bathroom and you've got your bed and your patient guest waiting area. So how do we make our furniture and our FF&E more adaptable to equipment that needs to be rolled in and then around the room? So back to the non-carpeted, no more wall-to-wall surfaces, for your flooring, no wallpaper on your walls in case, anything that could collect germs, and obviously the antimicrobial surfaces. So how do you do that in a way that's not so sterile looking? Is going to definitely be the challenge. But that's why the design industry, I think, is so paramount in this, because we are the creative thinkers in this world. And I think there is a way to balance those two facets.
That's superb. Spot on. And that is precisely the reason that this week Hospitality Talks is holding 3 sessions from designers all over the world to share their experiences, because it is critical that the design community thinks about it, because whilst we can learn a lot from hospitals, people unfortunately have to go to the hospitals. They want to go to the hotels. So we want to make sure that sentiment doesn't change. Haley, over to you. Let me start out with you. Any stories that you can share in the industry that is being done to uplift the community? Anything you might have learned during this time of stay-at-home policies?
I think the one thing that I've seen and witnessed and I'm so proud of is that you really see everybody coming together as a community. Everybody is in this together. And the sheer amount of kindness and gratitude and giving that has happened is fantastic. There's a lot of local restaurateurs. I'm based out of Phoenix, and people like Chris Bianco and Mark Tarbell are out there not only trying to help celebrate local farmers, local suppliers, but they're out there giving back to the community as well, even though they're the ones struggling at this time. Chef Roy Choi out of LA, who has Kogi, he's been getting a lot of social media slack, but I would like to give him a lot of praise because he's been out there personally in his food trucks, giving free service to not only the healthcare workers and public service providers, but even people that are out on Skid Row or homeless that have been hit. And it's amazing to see how people are using this slow time as an opportunity to give their time and give back to the community. It's fantastic.
Oh, that's superb. Thank you for sharing that. And if you get a chance, please do go on our channels and share these stories with hashtag Hospitality Heroes. I think it is critical that we recognize these individuals because we can all use great examples and uplifting stories. So let me ask Rebecca, anything that you might have learned yourself or anything that you might have seen that is really going above and beyond from the industry point of view?
Well, I do think the giving, just because Haley, to follow what she was speaking to, is there's so much, there's giving, there's so much that is people are stepping out to help. I do think this care and concern will, going forward from everybody's part, will fare well. And, you know, when the world comes back, people will remember. And I think there's so many kind gestures that are being made out there to help people. And I think there'll be more to come because this is probably could get worse before it gets better. And I just think the beauty of all of this is the sad thing is it has affected everyone, but it's everyone pulling together, and we will come out stronger by this.
Looking forward to more positive times on the other end of this pandemic. So certainly, last but not least, Sarah, any personal anecdotes that you would like to share or anything that you might have noticed?
Well, you know, recently I had to travel myself back to home to Pennsylvania for a family emergency. And I was literally the only person in this hotel that I needed to stay at during my week up there. I wasn't going to stay at home, again, just to socially distance from my own family, my elderly mother. And I will say that just the care that the staff at the hotel itself was just unbelievably kind and considerate. And again, going back to this kindness, community, sharing, partnership, like we're all in this together, and just still maintaining that sense of just service and making sure that I felt like a true guest was very touching to me, especially during the time that I was up there for. And so again, I think it's just this sense of humanity that we're all seeing, just on the ride to the airport alone, to see, Hilton's taking their rooms and lighting up the exteriors in the shape of a heart. But I mean, it's just so touching to see like that we're all in this together. We're a community, and we will pull through because it's what it's all about. It's partnership, it's extending our outreach, and it's making sure that we survive.
Humanity is very resilient, and in some ways, it's a good thing that we have very short memories so that we will have learned from this. And hopefully we will be back using those restaurants and living the way it's encoded in our DNA. We are social beings and we want to be together, not isolated. Thank you so much, Haley. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Sarah, for participating. Thanks to all of our viewers for joining. Before I turn it back to Sam for closing, it is terrific to have all of you join these conversations. A lot of thought-provoking discussions. We would encourage you to send us questions and topics as you have, so that we will continue to include those topics in planning our future sessions. Stay safe. Thank you for joining. Sam, over to you.
Thank you.
Well, these in conclusion, everything that just mentioned is that somebody just had said once that the service is what you provide to someone, but hospitality, how you make people feel. And I can see the outreach that you mentioned, particularly the chefs out there who are going over and above their own duty to help other people, and the whole thing. That's that feeling will always remain for a long time. That's what people will remember. Mm-hmm. So again, thank you very much for this very positive segment, and also I think there are a lot of takeaways that has been from this, and we will now have our next episode coming up on Wednesday. So meanwhile, just stay safe and be good. So we will close this with a final outro.